Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Simone Ndujiuba, board-certified oncology pharmacist, clinical oncology pharmacist, senior principal, therapeutics, and I'm joined today by.
I'm Dina Elberjawi, and I am a clinical pharmacy strategy director.
Welcome to our Oncology Trend webcast, where we explore key developments shaping the healthcare market. And today we present Future Ready Oncology, Innovations Shaping Tomorrow. And so during this discuss advancements in innovative therapies, shifts in the regulatory environment, reimbursement implications, and pipeline growth and strategic future directions. First, we're going to start with the evolution stories. We're going to examine 3 drug classes that have gained significant traction in oncology. The first one are our antibody drug conjugates. The first antibody drug conjugates, and we're going to refer to them as ADCs, gained FDA approval in 2000. Multiple ADCs have since been approved and are indicated to treat both solid tumor and hematologic cancers. ADC engineering, as far as the molecule, is unique in that there is a targeted monoclonal antibody that encapsulates a potent chemotherapy drug, also known as a payload. And this allows for the creation of that actual target. Now, the price range, as you can see, ranges from $81,000 all the way to over $570,000. And what we are also seeing with ADCs is that we, along with other novel agents that are entering the market, we're seeing that ADCs have improved the clinical outcomes, such as disease control, overall survival benefit, and cure when it was not possible with the therapy that existed at the time. And so with hundreds of ongoing clinical trials making their way through the drug pipeline, ADCs represent the fastest growing area of research in solid tumors. The next group of drugs that we have really dominating the market as well are the bispecific T-cell engagers. So BiSE entered the entered the U.S. market when the FDA approved it in 2014. However, it took 8 years before the next FDA approval of a new drug. And so since then, we've had an influx of novel BiTEs coming into the market. And what's unique about this particular drug is that the structure is so that we have 2 receptors, one that binds to the T cell that actually fights the cancer, and one that binds to the cancer cell, bringing them together to enhance the activity. And so drug prices for BiTE therapy varies from $250,000 to $1.2 million. And so like many cancer treatments, what we're seeing is that we're utilizing drugs that have benefit on their own, but we're also seeing combination regimens making their way through the treatment landscape. The last group of drugs that we would like to talk about is CAR T. So the first CAR T received FDA approval in 2017, and I can't believe it's already been that long. But CAR T is a cellular gene therapy where the patient's T cells are genetically modified to detect and attack specific cancers. CAR T drug prices range from $488,000 to over $500,000 just for the drug price. And so CAR Ts, ADCs, and BiTEs have provided targeted therapy and in some cases resulting in cure in late-stage cancers where cures were not seen before. And so many of these and other novel drugs in each of these categories that we've discussed so far have gained multiple FDA approvals, and many of them in earlier lines of therapy. So let's look at some of the challenges with treatment administration and adverse event management. And so administration and adverse event management is unique to each drug category. And so when we look at the ADCs, BiTEs, and CAR Ts, there's different challenges. ADCs are administered just like any standard intravenous drug. There is a potential for interstitial lung disease and liver dysfunction. BiTE and CAR Ts, the severe toxicity associated with them are cytokine release syndrome and also the potential for immune effector cell associated neurotoxicity syndrome. And we're going to call that ICANS. And so these two conditions, CRS and ICANS, can be very dangerous and can lead patients to an ICU admission. The incidence and severity of CRS and ICANS is much greater with CAR T than with BiTE therapy. With BiTEs, there is a step-up dose, and that's when we see the greatest potential for CRS and ICANS. And then after that, during the maintenance therapy, it's much less likely. For CAR T, it's one and done, typically, except for one CAR T agent where it's given it for 2 doses. And so the process for a patient receiving CAR T is much more involved, where it starts with the patient T cell collection all the way to CAR T administration. And toxicities are also variable and more severe with CAR T. As with any other medication, the concern, of course, is around mitigating toxicity. And what we're finding is that there are designs to the structure of these drugs to help mitigate that and also create resistance to any mutations, and also increase activity for those patients that may not see the benefit of these drugs at this time. And so, as mentioned, ADCs, BiTEs, and CAR Ts, we're seeing responses in later stages. Many of these drugs are coming in at earlier stages. So a lot of variability in its utilization right now. What we are seeing is that the indications for BiTEs and CAR Ts in many cases are overlapping. And so due to the greater T cell engagement and the single dose of CAR T, we see much higher response rates and duration of response with CAR T compared to BiTEs. And in many cases, CAR T is preferred because of this increased potential for cure. When we consider the price cost of therapy, and when we're talking about overall cost of therapy for BiTEs, it could be significantly for less when we compare it to CAR T, because CAR T total cost in many cases can reach $1 million or more. So there is concern that arises because while we're seeing cures, they occur in a relatively small subset of patients. Unfortunately, we currently lack the ability to accurately identify which patients are most likely to benefit from these treatments. Because of the off-the-shelf availability of BiTEs, decreased AEs, potential for lower total cost of care, there's always the hope that BiTE therapy could be an alternative to CAR T therapy. And so interestingly, my team and we found a survey of relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma patients and their providers. And in this survey, it found that even though progression-free survival was the most important factor for both the patient and the provider, they both would accept lower progression-free survival for decreased adverse events. And so both CAR T and BiTEs are indicated in third line for relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma. So there is actually an ongoing debate now as far as which one to use first, BiTEs or CAR T. Follicular lymphoma is difficult to treat, and patients experience multiple disease relapses. So my team and I conducted a study that was presented at our recent AMCP Nexus 2025, where we described the real-world utilization of BiTEs and CAR T for relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma treatment. And we looked at patients from December of 2021 through March of 2024. The study included one BiTE, Lunsumio, because it was the only BiTE that had enough claims to compare to the 3 CAR T drugs that are currently available to treat relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma. The objective of the study was to compare a 12-month total cost of care and adverse events for patients treated with CAR T and BiTEs. And so what we found was that the utilization was about 50-50 for BiTEs and CAR T for commercial and Medicare lines of business. Urban areas administered greater than 70% of all CAR T and BiTE doses. And more than 50% of patients experience adverse events with CAR T, while 23% patients that received bites had adverse events. The incidence of CRS, ICANS, and other immune effector toxicities were much greater with CAR T. And so during the time frame studied, CAR T drug cost was nearly double that of BiTEs for both commercial and Medicare lines of business. Also, the place of service for BiTE therapy, even though there are challenges in transitioning BiTEs to the community outpatient setting for administration, most BiTE doses were administered in an outpatient hospital site of service. And so what we have seen recently is that REMS requirements have been removed for CAR T. However, many BiTEs still have REMS requirements, even though CRS is less severe and occurs at a much lower incidence than what we see with CAR T. So as new bispecifics enter the market, and if they demonstrate similar responses and duration of response that is comparable to CAR T, we may start to see a market shift in other cancers with utilization. And so, Dina, can you share some of the market shifts we can anticipate?
Thank you, Simone. Yes. So on June 26, 2025, the FDA removed REMS for all autologous CD19 and BCMA-directed CAR Ts. These include Abecma, Breyanzi, Carvykti, Kymriah, Tecartus, and Yescarta. This marks a significant shift in how these therapies will be managed and delivered moving forward. Previously, sites had to undergo an extensive REMS certification and maintain immediate access to tocilizumab, for example, for CRS management. With this change, those elements are no longer required, and the key safety expectations are now fully captured within the product labeling itself. The FDA made this decision after determining that the REMS programs were no longer necessary to ensure patient safety. In other words, the training wheels are off, but we're keeping the helmets on. And what does this mean in practice? It opens the door to broader site eligibility, especially in community and rural areas. It also relieves some of the administrative burden that providers suffer and may streamline patient access to care. This shift would have real downstream effects on where and how patients receive therapy. As that landscape opens up, the next logical question becomes, where will these therapies actually be delivered? And how will that impact cost and affordability? Which brings us to our next slide. When we look at site of care dynamics, there's an important distinction between commercial and Medicare lines of business. On the commercial side, outpatient administration can be less costly than inpatient delivery. Lower facility fees and reduced hospitalization needs can make outpatient settings an attractive option for payers. As more sites become eligible to administer CAR Ts, we can help support strategies that steer care toward these lower cost but still high quality environments. But the story looks different for Medicare. Inpatient reimbursement is through MSDRG bundles, and that can fall sometimes below acquisition costs, putting pressure on hospitals that provide these therapies. Outpatient billing under OPS or APC is more precise, but it is still limited in adoption. On top of that, Medicare patients are responsible for 20% coinsurance under Part B, but not under Part A, which is inpatient. So while extended access may reduce overall net cost for commercial plans, it could simultaneously include affordability barriers for Medicare beneficiaries. That's why, as access expands and costs shift across sites of care, it's more important than ever that we proactively plan for these reforms. Let's talk about the oncology pipeline. As the oncology pipeline continues to expand at an incredible pace, and it's not just the number of therapies available, It's the complexity of their administration, contracting consideration, and monitoring requirements. Proactive planning helps us anticipate those shifts. It means forecasting budget impact and utilization, preparing our networks operationally for these new sites of care, and building strategies that keep therapies affordable for both payers and patients. At the same time, we have to think beyond payment. Outcomes based contracting can align reimbursement to real world performance, and risk sharing arrangements can help mitigate uncertainty for both manufacturers and payers. To make those models work, though, we need strong data infrastructure and the ability to capture outcomes, track total cost of care, and support evidence driven contracting decisions. At times, we're continually monitoring these frameworks to support our clients' goals, ensuring that as innovation accelerates, we maintain a strong balance between access, affordability, and quality of care. In short, proactive planning helps us stay ahead of the oncology curve. But now I'll turn it over to Simone, who will show us what we can expect as we move forward.
Dina, thank you so much for that. That was very insightful. And so, as we move forward, Prime sought to understand the payer perspective as it relates to CAR-T specifically. So, in the 15th edition of the Prime Therapeutics Medical Pharmacy Trend Report that was released this year, payers were surveyed on some questions related to CAR-T. And so from that survey, we found that 41% of payers lack the staff and infrastructure to monitor CAR-T therapy. And so this is prohibiting the movement of CAR-T administration to outpatient and then also outside of academic centers. What we also found was that 30% of payers surveyed say that they have seen CAR-T administration move from the hospital to an outpatient setting, and 3% of respondents preferred one CAR-T over another, but 44% indicated they may be considering a future strategy. And so with the responses, the question that comes to my mind is, are we at a point where we can prefer one CAR-T over another or a BiTE over a CAR-T? I think the answer to that right now, at least from our perspective, is not quite. We're not quite there yet, especially when we consider large geographic regions and variations to care access. But we're getting closer as new drugs enter the market. When we look at future developments for ADCs, BiTEs, and CAR-Ts, with these three drug classes, we're seeing improvements in the structure that's allowing for multiple targets within that one molecule. We're seeing improvements in efficacy and a goal to decrease toxicity. As more and more new drugs enter the market, there are certain considerations, such as optimizing treatment sequencing, enhancing the understanding of therapy optimization strategies, and evaluating cost effectiveness. And so, in summary, ADCs, BiTEs, and CAR T cell therapies represent innovative, targeted treatments that have delivered significant clinical improvements, including enhanced disease control, overall survival benefit, and even cures where previously therapies fell short. Recent regulatory changes are expected to influence CAR T and BiTE utilization over time. Evaluating cost effectiveness and identifying patients most likely to benefit from these therapies is critical. With new drugs entering the market and the oncology pipeline expanding, proactive strategic planning by managed care organizations is essential. And so thank you, Dina, for joining me for this latest Oncology Trend webcast.
Thank you, Simone.
And for the audience, there is an opportunity to request feedback. So please reach out to your respective account representatives and also leave comments. You can expect the next installment of the Oncology Trend webcast the first quarter of next year. Until then, have a wonderful day and a great holiday season.